Let's go ahead and get started then. I know that we were a little higher on participants earlier, so hopefully folks will, folks are sharing where the links are, and we're getting up there. I think we're at high 30s. I think we're in the low 40s earlier. Yeah. Okay. So let's go ahead and get started, Brianna.
All right. Thank you. All right. Thank you, everyone. Let's try this one more time. I think we will go back to Jody. We were able to get introductions from some of you, but not all of you. So Jody, if you can go back through and call those that either potentially weren't here or those that weren't able to speak so they can introduce themselves, that would be great.
Okay. So Shay Marshall. Hi, Shay.
Hi, I'm Shay Marshall. I have 2 children, one at BGI and one at Newark Junior High.
Thank you. Thank you, Shay. Vilma Mendoza.
I don't see that name anywhere.
Okay. All right. Well, just super quick, let's make sure everybody got back on the new link. So just a quick, I'm here would be great. So Rachel, did you get to rejoin us? Rachel Bloom? Thank you. And Sue Eustace? I can't see Sue, so if you could unmute and say here, that'd be great.
I see Sue.
Great. And Janet Crocker? Thank you, Sue, I saw you. Janet Crocker, did she join us? Okay, thank you. Hamilton. I think I see Hamilton.
I'm here.
Thank you, Hamilton. Veronica Medina, did you find the new link?
I'm here.
Thank you. Celine Nevarez. Did Selena make it back?
I do not see.
Okay. Angela Ringline, did you make it back on the link?
Yeah, I'm here.
Thank you, Angela. What about Maria Ibarra?
I'm here.
Thank you, Maria. Catherine Ingham Waters. Okay, I see Catherine, so perfect. Thank you. Christine Dix, did you get back in?
Yep, I'm here.
Thank you, Christine. What about Michelle Padilla? Did Michelle rejoin us? There you are. Thank you, Michelle. And then I believe I was at the 2 board members. President Martinez, I don't believe you got a chance to introduce yourself.
Hi, everyone. Elisa Martinez. I am the current board president. I'm also a parent of 2 students. I have one son in Birch Grove Intermediate, and my daughter just started high school as a freshman. Thank you.
Thank you. And then Member Nguyen, did you join? There you are. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. All right. Well, here we are. We're at the point where we've taken our roll call. Thank you, everyone, for introducing yourselves and your patience with getting this meeting started. Part of roll call is making sure that we establish a quorum. We need to have 50% of our members here. So for this committee, that means that we need to have 7 members present. With the roll call I just did, we definitely have 7. So so we have established a quorum for this meeting. So I'm going to move on to item C on the agenda, which is visitor and public comment. Tonight I do have 3 people that provided public comment for this committee. So I'd like to go ahead and read those to you. And then when I'm done with those, we can continue with the meeting. So the first public comment that I received, and everyone can hear me okay, correct?
Yes.
Thank you. I am Terrence Grindle, former Newark Assistant City Manager and presently a school board candidate. And before I go on, I just want to make sure that everybody in the Spanish can hear our translator. Vilma, is everything working on the Spanish side over there? My apologies, I just want to make sure. She's going to send me a quick, okay. Okay, I'm going to go ahead. I've let the translator know that we're starting. So my apologies. Again, let me start over again. First public comment. I am Terrence Grindle, former Newark Assistant City Manager and presently a school board candidate. First and foremost, I would like to commend this committee for taking on this important work. I would encourage you to be careful and deliberate in addressing the sensitive issues before you. I would like to point out two issues. One, please take the major maintenance needs of schools into account when considering which campus may be consolidated. Other things being equal, consider retaining campuses that do not require major capital repairs. Two, please be aware that the school site in Area 3 that the city required to be donated to the district requires the construction of at least part of a school to secure the 6-acre site. School construction must begin within 5 years to receive this site at no cost to the district. Thank you for your consideration. Please feel free to contact me if I can be of assistance. Terrence Grindle. The second public comment is from Ms. Cindy Parks. Good evening, committee members. The reason this committee has been formed is due to the district's budgetary issues. Each time there was a board agenda item for this committee, the agenda stated that there was no fiscal impact. I will hope you will join me and ask how much school services is being paid for their role. Item E, overview of committee responsibilities. I assume we'll address the committee's purpose and composition document approved by the board on April 9th, 2020. Why isn't that document included in the agenda for your review prior to the meeting? Also, there's a typographical error on page 2 of the document, which needs to be corrected. Item H, overview of school sites under consideration. I'm glad you will receive a Brown Act presentation. The Brown Act states the legislative body, the district, shall post an agenda containing a brief general description of each item of business to be transacted or discussed at the meeting. Why aren't the school sites under consideration listed on the agenda? I'd like to make the same observation about agenda item I, presentation of proposed criteria scoring methodology. This item says it's an action item, yet there isn't a brief general description of the item, nor documentation for the public to preview to make comment on prior to the committee casting their vote. Finally, in the spirit of transparency, the committee's responsibility document continually says potential school closures, yet an excerpt from the Alameda County Office of Education's April 13, 2020 letter to the school district states, the expenditure reductions include school closures and require additional oversight by a committee. ACOE encouraged the district to work with its stakeholders with urgency to ensure the expenditure reductions materialize as scheduled. The following excerpt from the April 29, 2020 letter states, ACOE encourages the district to work with its stakeholders with urgency to ensure that the expenditure reductions materialize as scheduled. The closure doesn't sound potential to me. The committee's charge entails being fully informed of the district's finances, enrollment, and other relevant data, which prompts the committee's independent recommendation. Your work should not be guided or influenced by district staff, board members, or the ACOE letters, since those letters were drafted with the district's since those letters were drafted, the district's revenue has significantly increased. Therefore, their situation isn't as dire as the ACOE letters and 2021 budget indicates. Please insist on facts and data concerning cost savings and conjecture. The recommendation from the committee has the potential to cause significant changes to the school district and the city of Newark as a whole. Thank you for your attention to my comments, Cindy Parks. And we have one more public comment for this committee. Dear School Closure Advisory Committee, first of all, I want to wish this committee a lot of wisdom in providing advice to the NUSD School Board on the school closure matter. I want to question why a committee created by the school board in order to obtain independent advice should have school board members as its members. It clearly dilutes giving independent advice with decision-making. Hopefully the committee would not make any of the board members the committee chair or vice chair. The Brown Act is a great legal tool. It is not designed to stifle communication between its members. It is designed to enforce transparency to the public. All materials distributed to the committee members must be included in the agenda packet so that the public has the same information as the committee members, not 24 hours later. Also, the agenda items must contain a description detailed enough for the public to understand what is going to be discussed and acted upon. I hope this committee obtains and interprets data and facts in order to independently make its findings and recommendation. The last thing Newark needs is a committee that simply takes the findings from the district and signs at the dotted line. It is great to have a facilitator, but I sincerely hope that the sole role of School Services of California will be to facilitate the process instead of becoming a spokesperson for the administrator's wishes or becoming a voice for the school board. School Services of California should not engage in private discussions between the administration and school board members related to school closure. They should only communicate with respect to matters of facilitation. This committee will not provide any added value if it does not independently make its own conclusions and findings. That requires a lot of work. The committee should require the district to provide the information it needs, financial data for the next few years, demographics, school site information, traffic patterns, and feedback from parents, teachers, and staff, either directly or through unions. It should also obtain information on the financial, employment, and student impact on closing a school site. Clearly, the financial impact is only one element of the decision-making process. Please do not forget the other elements as well. I strongly recommend a non-quorum ad hoc subcommittee consisting of a few committee members from different stakeholder groups doing a lot of groundwork, collecting and summarizing the required information to eventually help the committee do its independent findings. Thank you for your attention. Carrie Knoop. And that is all the public comment that I received.
It would help if I unmuted myself. Thank you very much, Jody, for reading those out loud. So with that, we are going to move to item number D. And really, I want to provide a brief introduction of myself and the role that I and School Services are playing in this process. My name is Brianna Garcia. I'm with School Services of California, and the district has brought us on to help guide you through this process. We are not here to provide any judgments or to provide any recommendations ourselves. I am here to facilitate that you as the committee are getting the information that you need from the district in order for you to make your decision and your recommendations to the board. And I'm here to help answer questions as you move through this process and try to keep us on task so that we can pull together a recommendation for you to provide to the board. Our intent is to, at each one of the meetings, provide you with data and information based on specific topics that you need in order to make those decisions. And then throughout this process, I will be compiling the information, the conversations that you're having to put together a report for your review that will be your final recommendation that's going to go to the Board of Education. We are going to be appointing a chair and a vice chair. And from that point, they will be the ones that are moving the meeting forward. But again, I will be here in order to make sure that you are receiving the information that you need, that the meeting is moving forward, and that coordination with the district really is in order to ensure that you're getting all the information necessary to make an informed decision as we're moving forward. All right. So with that, Jody, could you potentially pull up, or not potentially, could you please pull up the PowerPoint presentation and share that with everyone?
Yes, thank you.
Ms. Bloom, do you have a question?
Yeah, thank you. So I went through everything like we were told to do so I could be prepared. And I noticed in your profile, Ms. Garcia, that it says you have extensive experience related to planning and development of charter school facilities. And so I was wondering if, is that part of like an agenda, or is there charter schools on the, like, are they kind of on the, are they just relevant, or is that something that people are talking about? Or I just wanted to know. Thank you.
No, that is part of my background with regards to facilities, but that is not a conversation, at least that I have had with the district. My understanding, and we're going to go through that slide in a moment as well, to read out to you what the board's charge is to the committee. And with that, there was no agenda with regards to charters, no charters, etc. It was really to look at the potential closures and or consolidations of school sites in order to really right size the districts.
Thank you so much.
No problem. And I will warn you now, and hopefully Ms. De La Cruz and Ms. Gutierrez can keep an eye out when we go to the screen, sharing the screen. I can only see about 3 pictures at a time. So if there's anybody raising their hands, I won't be able to see that as we're moving forward. So if the 2 of you could help me and speak up if somebody's raising their hand, I would appreciate that. So this was just what Ms. Bloom was just referring to with regards to my bio, was just trying to provide you with a little bit of background of my experience. I worked for LAUSD for 8.5 years before coming to School Services of California, and my background with them prior to that, my education, etc., is all real estate facilities based. And that includes with my time at LAUSD also with working with charter schools, but again, trying to help them secure facilities through the Los Angeles Unified School District. So if we can go to the next slide. So this you have been practicing already, but we like to keep these protocols in our presentations and on the mind. As we said, if you can just keep yourself muted, if you have a question, raise your hands, and we will call on you in order to do that, just in order to make sure that we're not trying to speak over each other. As you know, it makes it much more difficult in this type of environment to be able to do that. We appreciate Ms. Bloom and others for reading the information in advance and coming prepared to the meetings. And so I look forward to having not only an exchange of information, but good conversation in order to arrive at a recommendation that makes sense for your community based on the information that the committee is going to be reviewing. So if we can go to the next slide, or one more. These are the committee responsibilities and a little bit about the committee itself. So the Board of Education is the one who requested the appointment of this committee as it moves forward. It has, it determines that it was going to have 2 board members on the committee. We have the chair and the vice chair that are, the board president and the board member who are on the committee. And the school board did note that they would be the chair and the vice chair of the committee. With regards to other representatives, the broad brush was to find community representative, parents from all of the school sites, representatives of the various district committees, representatives of staff on site, whether it be principals, members of the various bargaining units within the district, and also other members of the community at large. And so we appreciate all of you for your willingness to participate in this endeavor and for your time commitment. And we will do our best to respect that time as we move forward. And so we thank you for being a part of that. Next slide.
Brianna, sorry to
Yes.
interrupt. I think Ms. Bloom has a question.
Wonderful. Thank you for keeping track of that for me, Ms. Nguyen. Yes, Ms. Bloom.
Thank you. Back to the norms. Dr. Triplett, we're asking students if they can to keep their cameras on. Is that a norm that we're trying to do for this committee? What is our stance on that? What are our expectations?
So right now, the cameras that are coming up are those that are participants, and that's who you can see on the screen. You're not seeing the general public. So they can hear what we are saying, and as you saw, what was read earlier, submit public comments in advance to be read into the record, but we will not see their videos or their faces on the screen.
What about our panelists?
All the panelists are the ones that are showing up. So when we're not in this view, all of those images are there. I will leave it up to the discretion of each individual panelist if you want to keep your photo up when you're not speaking. So that was certainly up to your discretion.
And if I may add, once the question has been answered, if you could please take the hand down to make it easy to track. Thank you.
All right. So this is just showing you a list of the committee members that are on the committee. And so we wanted to make sure that that was, that all of your contributions were acknowledged and that that information was there for the public. Next slide. Jody, could I get the next slide, please? There seems to be a bit of a delay.
So I'm at committee charge, number 1 through 5.
I don't know. I'm still seeing on the screen committee members, but oh, there it goes. It's just a little bit of a delay on my end. Thank you. So this is the committee charge, again, that was approved by the Board of Education at their board meeting. The idea is the charge that they put forward was to put together a school consolidation committee in order to provide recommendations to the school board on the potential for, again, either consolidation or closure of school sites, given the district's looking at financial information, looking at demographic information, looking at capacity, current and future enrollment, and other information. And so we are going to be looking, and what the board requested with that we are considering each school site for potential to look at that. We'll be looking at the educational programs that are being offered and all of those other needs and interests that are important when you're trying to determine and make a decision that's difficult, such as this one. If I can get the next slide, Jody. These are the other charges that are listed on the board. This is where we really start getting into the type of work that we're going to be doing. As you note, number 6 shows that it's develop and utilize criteria and demographic data in order to base those recommendations on. So we want to make sure that we are using objective criteria. This is a very difficult process and can be a very emotional process when we're talking about closing a student's school. And so we want to try to be as objective as we can and limit biases where we can, though obviously we're human and there's always going to be a little bit of that comes into play. They asked that we consider boundaries and how those play out, as well as looking at what potential sites and providing those potential sites for closure. And so the process that I hope to walk you through over the next several weeks is again an objective process that's looking at all of those various areas that are important when considering a school closure in order to have that conversation. But it's important, as was mentioned before, that this was a committee that was appointed by the Board of Education and therefore is a committee of the board and is a committee that's subject to the Brown Act. And so we do want to give you a brief overview of what that entails, what the potential conflict of interest might be, and basically the rules of engagement for any Brown Act subcommittee of the board. And so with that on the line, I saw his name earlier, is William Tunick with Dennis Walliver and Kelly, and he will provide you just a brief overview on the Brown Act and potential conflict of interest considerations as we move forward over the next several months.
Well, thank you, and I appreciate the opportunity to speak with you tonight. I know the agenda item says we've got 15 minutes for this topic, and obviously the Brown Act alone is a lot of ground to cover, so I want to jump right in, starting with the Brown Act. So if I could get the next slide. Thank you. So I know we've got this committee, we've got a combination, obviously, of some board members, former board members, district staff, community members. I think we may have varying levels of familiarity with the Brown Act. So I want to just kind of cover some of the basics of it. Like I said, in 15 minutes, we can only do so much. But, you know, the main purpose of the Brown Act really is twofold. One is to allow the public to remain informed of the actions and sort of the deliberations of local representatives. So this applies to all local agencies. And to provide a little bit of a procedural framework for those meetings. It actually doesn't provide as much of a framework as you would think if you look in a board agenda, in the Brown Act. It doesn't really tell you a lot about how to formulate an agenda, information, action items, that type of thing. It more focuses on providing information to the public, so they sort of know, they get a general sense of what in this case, the committee is going to be talking about. And that actually kind of brings us to the next point, which is that committees like this one that are created by the board are subject to the Brown Act. So just like the governing board or the city council or anything else like that, this committee is subject to the requirements of the Brown Act, which obviously is why we're talking about it here today. And I think, you know, one thing, especially when we're talking to folks that are new to the Brown Act, it's a little bit, sometimes can create some issues, is that it's not really a natural way of running any sort of organization. If you think about a family or a business or a classroom, whatever it may be, or school, if there's an issue or a concern, the first thing you want to do if you're working as part of a team is find someone else on that team, sit down, start talking with them, then call up somebody else who's part of the team, talk to them, try to figure out how to make it work. You don't usually think, well, this is an urgent issue, let's post an agenda item, we'll wait 72 hours and then we'll talk about it, right? That's not really the natural reaction, but that in a lot of ways, that's what the Brown Act requires. So I think sometimes there is this tension between committee members wanting to be proactive, wanting to interact, wanting to really make progress, but also making sure that we're doing it in a way that complies with the Brown Act. And so that's why somebody to always think about, and we'll kind of talk about where that really comes up. You know, the primary kind of requirements around the Brown Act are really around meetings, right? That's what the Brown Act is all about. So, and I want to talk about some of these requirements, but obviously, as you know, everybody can tell from being on this type of meeting, things are a little bit different right now than they were, you know, prior to about March 11th, March 12th, something like that. So I'll cover both what the Brown Act requires and what we're operating with right now. Primary requirement is that meetings of committees, boards, whoever it may be, have to be open and noticed. And open means exactly what it sounds like it means, which usually means a physical location that members of the public can access. They can't be charged, has to be ADA accessible, you know, the district office being an example. Obviously right now that's not the case. With everything going on with the pandemic, there's an executive order that actually waives that requirement. So it allows these types of meetings to be held electronically with a couple of requirements. One of them being that members of the public can observe the meeting. So that's, today we have it through the Zoom webinar. That can be Zoom, it can be YouTube, it can be phone, like a call-in number. There's a lot of different ways to observe the meeting, but that's the requirement. But with that, we can have everybody essentially calling in from wherever they may be to attend the meeting, which is obviously very different than pre-COVID. One thing that hasn't changed is the meetings have to be noticed. And so for those of you familiar with public meetings, that generally means 72 hours in advance. The agenda, so the list of the items to be transacted or discussed at the meeting, has to be posted at the district office. And actually, although for committees, it's actually not entirely required, but definitely best practice to put it on the website as well. So that's 72 hours, just for those of you who are wondering, that's 72 just plain hours, not business, not district, anything else like that. So that brings us to the agenda itself, which I know we took public comment about. What the agenda is required to include is a general description of items that either business to be transacted, discussion items, basically whatever the board, or in this case the committee, is going to do at the meeting, that should be reflected in the agenda. If it's not on the agenda, the committee in most cases can't discuss it or take action on it. And the idea there, of course, and when we come to the agenda items, my thought has always been, one way to look at it is, if you're a member of the public, if you look at the agenda, and there's something you care about, are you going to know, well, tonight's the night, in pre-COVID times anyway, I need to get, a babysitter, I need to take time off, I need to do whatever I'm going to do because I want to go to this meeting to talk about this topic or watch what's going to happen. Is there enough there to be able to figure that out? There is no magic formula for an agenda item, but that's one way that I like to think about it. So, again, is there enough, just a general description? It doesn't have to have every single detail of the agenda item. Obviously, more information is usually better, but the Brown Act requirements are actually pretty limited on exactly what has to be on the agenda. And that hasn't changed with COVID. The last piece of it, another big piece, is the ability of the public to provide comment normally at a public meeting. Obviously with COVID, things are a little bit different. One thing about the public comment that I think is important, and especially I think when we get to committees of this size and that are trying to get ascertain public comment, is the difference between public comment and public discussion, right? And when we talk to boards, we talk a lot about it's a meeting of the board in the public, it's not a public meeting. And what I mean by that is that the public should be able to observe the meeting, it should be able to address the board, but we want to be careful about having too much discussion back and forth all the time between a committee or a board and members of the public. And the reason I say that isn't because we want to try to limit that conversation, it's because if you do it, it works well and when it works well. When you get 400 people that all want to have a back and forth discussion, then it starts not to work as well. And then the problem is, well, why do you do it sometimes and you don't other times if you have an issue with what someone's saying? And so I think the way to deal with that is to try to follow this requirement that, look, public comment is to be made before the board addresses an item. That's the Brown Act requirement. And then the board or the committee takes it from there. There can be a little bit of back and forth, but we really want to try to stick to that formula where we can. This is another thing that's been modified during COVID. Normally, public comment, you would have to physically be at a meeting in order to provide it. That requirement is waived. What's now required is that the public have the opportunity to address the board, the committee, I should say, one way or the other. So that can be done in a lot of ways. We've seen, some districts and some boards, committees are using Zoom where everybody has their camera on and everybody makes public comment that way. There's others that are using, requiring email or forms in advance of the meeting, and then those comments get read during the meeting like we saw tonight. All of those are acceptable. There's kind of a variety. It really depends on the district, the technology, a lot of different factors in there. The important part is that the public's given an opportunity to provide that comment before the board or the committee, I should say, sorry, either addresses the topic or holds that discussion. So you had that tonight, and it can be done the way it was done actually tonight of having all the public comment at the beginning of the meeting. That's perfectly acceptable. You could also do it along with each item. So those are, again, just real quick nutshell there on some of the Brown Act requirements as far as running the meeting. The other big piece that I wanted to talk about is the prohibition on serial communication. So this is sort of the inverse. What we just talked about is all the requirements that apply when you have a meeting. And then the inverse of that is basically inadvertently having a meeting or having those discussions happening outside of an agendized meeting. And what we call those, or the Brown Act calls those, is serial communications. And what that is essentially as you would think, a series of communications either between committee members or between an intermediary, and this can be email, it could be in person, phone, whatever it may be, where you end up with a majority of the committee discussing or deliberating or even taking action on anything within the jurisdiction of the committee. Now, for governing boards, this can be a real challenge because generally there's only 5 members, which means a majority is 3, which means that if any 3 members of the board talk about something outside of a board meeting, that can become a problem. When you have a committee of this size, just based purely on numbers, the majority is much bigger, right? So the chance of that happening accidentally is probably lower. The other thing that sort of counsels against it for this type of group is that it only applies to any items of business that are within the subject matter jurisdiction of the committee. So in other words, I mean, what the takeaway from all this is that the discussion between the committee members about the business for the committee should happen at the meeting. It's a pretty logical takeaway. That shouldn't be going on in email chains. There shouldn't be reply alls going on between committee members that about the jurisdiction of the committee. If a group of you have something else in common that you're talking about that doesn't have anything to do with what the committee is doing, that's not a problem. But if it's about the committee, that's or what the committee is doing, that's the type of communication that should be happening at a committee meeting. So that was kind of the Brown Act in a nutshell. It might be actually, I was going to maybe just stop there real quickly and see if there's any questions before I move on to the next slide. I don't think I see any. Oh, I do see one. Sorry. That's Veronica, I think.
Yeah, just to clarify, so we can talk with the committee, but just not a majority of the committee? And would that be like in our size, maybe like 7?
Yeah. I mean, obviously you want to be careful about asking the attorney to do math, but yeah, no, that's the idea that you can. I think the thing you want to be careful about is, say, a group of 3 of you are talking about something, right? That by itself is not a problem. Then there's a group of 4 other committee members that are talking about the same thing, and you get one person from each of those groups that then talks to each other. Now we've had a serial communication between 7 people, even though they weren't all together when it happened. Does that make sense? So it can be, so that's why, even though I said it's harder for it to happen, it still can. And I think the easy way to avoid that is just try to keep all of those communications happening and all those discussions happening at the meetings and not outside the meetings. And then we don't have that issue.
Okay, thank you.
Sure. The other? Great. So the next slide, I just wanted to cover 2 other things quickly. One is the Public Records Act, which again, if for those of you who are either board members or work with the district, probably familiar with the California Public Records Act already. What essentially it says is members of the public are entitled to either copies or inspection of public records. And it's got a pretty broad definition of what a public record is, which is what we've got here up on the screen. Anything related to the conducts of the public business that's prepared, owned, used, or retained by the district. This could include communications or records that relate to this committee. And I think sometimes when especially we have members of the public or community members, I should say, who are part of these types of groups, that's something maybe that, may not be used to as opposed to board members or district staff. So that's something I wanted to bring to your attention. We've also got a couple of years ago, the California Supreme Court said this includes, Gmail accounts, texts, those types of things, even if they're on a, quote unquote, private account, not a district account. But big important caveat here, this only applies to your work on the committee. So that doesn't mean that just because you've joined this committee now, a member of the public can ask for every email you've ever sent to anybody. What it does mean is if there's records that pertain specifically to this committee, those may be public records subject to disclosure. And again, not all of them are. I'm not going to go through the entire CPRA analysis, but it is something I just wanted to quickly mention because sometimes that can come as a surprise to committee members. Then the last thing I wanted to quickly touch on, I just wanted to make sure I didn't see any questions, but I don't think I do, was conflicts of interest. And this one was also a little bit different, especially for the board members than what they may be used to. A lot of the normal conflict of interest prohibitions that apply to elected officials don't apply to advisory committees. So we're not dealing so much with those as we are sort of more just the common sense, what we like to say is avoiding the appearance of impropriety. That being said, I think it's important with a committee like this to know also that individuals are on this committee because of their relationships and their positions and the groups that they represent. So clearly there is some interest that they're bringing to the committee, and that's why you're here, right? So I don't think that's not the type of conflict of interest that we're talking about. Usually when we mean conflict of interest, we mean some sort of personal financial gain that could happen out of something that the committee recommends. That's the type of thing. And, really something sort of, it's usually done in the context of a business interest or something like that. It's unlikely to occur in this case, I think, but it is something we wanted to talk about a little bit, just so that, it's more of a, if something comes up and you go, you know what, I have this interest and maybe there's some connection between that and what we're talking about, just ask first. I think that's the issue or kind of the takeaway here. I'm not going to give you a whole spiel on all the different conflict of interest rules, but something to be thinking about. And actually the best way to maybe to look at this, if we go to the next slide, there you go, was we put together sort of this code of conduct for the committee. And actually I think some of these things were already in some of the prior slides, but they're in here as well. This is also something we use for oversight committees, bond oversight, those types of committees. I think is helpful just to lay out some basic rules. But, if you look at the last two of those, I think the last 2 points on there, those kind of encapsulate what we're talking about here, right? Which is that we're trying to avoid financial conflicts of interest, whether those be yours or family members, and that ultimately, the decisions that are made and the input you provide at the committee are there, are being sort of motivated by your duty to the committee and the district, not so much a personal or business interest. And again, I don't expect there to be any concerns about that, but I think it's always a good place to start to just review that and make sure everyone is on the same page as the committee gets started with their business. So with that, I think I covered the world of Brown Act, public records, and conflicts in 15 minutes, but if there's any questions on any of those, I'd be happy to answer them.
Mr. Tunick, Ms. Bloom has a question.
Yep.
I have a question about the communication. It seems like it was mostly between board members. What about members of the public? So I'm a teacher, like one of two that are on the committee. So a lot of people will probably be asking me about what's going on. So how does that work?
Thank you. That's actually a really great question. Well, and actually you brought up, there's 2 points that I want to mention. I appreciate that. One is that's not an issue. Communications, it works the same way as it does for board members, it would for committee members. Communications with the public are not an issue. The only time they can become an issue, and again, it would be pretty difficult, is if that person ends up acting as an intermediary again between commission members. So if a member of the public said, basically, I've talked to 5 other committee members and they think the recommendation should be ABC. What do you think? I'm going to go talk to some more. Like that type of thing, that would be problematic because then they would be sort of allowing that to happen. But no, if you want to say, I'd like your input, or they want to share their input, all of those things, that's all perfectly fine. The other thing that I was going to mention, and again, thank you for asking, is communications from either committee or district staff about the business of the committee or information, that type of stuff that's flowing from the district staff to the committee. That's also not a Brown Act violation, even if that goes to everybody at the same time. And beyond that, if individual committee members have questions for district or committee staff, those conversations can also happen on a one-on-one basis. So those are 2 exceptions that are very helpful. So yeah, thank you for bringing that up.
Thank you.
And actually, if I may, on that topic, we want to make sure that all committee members are getting the same information and have the ability to hear all the same things. So if you do have questions for the committee or information that you want from staff, we're asking that all of you send your requests to Jody, and then we will get the answers to your questions, and then that information will be shared with all of the committee. So that way everybody is getting the same questions and answers, and there's not some of you that know something and others that don't know something. So please channel And again, trying to make sure that we're meeting the Brown Act requirements and that we're minimizing talk within the committee members so that we don't end up with a serial meeting situation. Send all questions or comments, et cetera, to Jody, and then we will make sure that we respond to all committee members with that information.
Yeah, and I mean, I think that the thing to remember, maybe the easiest way to remember on the serial meeting is that, and this goes in general, I think that reply all is not your friend. And so you want to be very careful about hitting reply all to the entire committee, because that is a real quick way to cause a serial meeting. So yeah, and you know, I think that was a good point. I think that even goes for public comment too. A lot of times, you know, I think if a member of the public has some input they want to share, really probably the best way to do it is provide public comment during the committee meeting so that the entire committee can hear it. I know that's not always easy to do, but that's obviously, you know, the best way if they want to have everyone hear what their input. So any other questions? I don't see any. Excellent. Okay, well, I again, I appreciate the opportunity to be here tonight, and of course, I'll be happy to answer any questions if there's anything later on.
Thank you very much, Will, and we appreciate that. So the next item on the agenda is item G, which is appointment of the chairperson and the vice chairperson of the committee. As I noted previously on the slide, the board's charge to the committee and in their description of the committee members and their selection of the pool of people that they wanted on the committee, they did note that 2 board members would be members of the committee and that those 2 board members would be the chair and the vice chair of the committee. That said, we do need the committee itself. We want you to take that official action to appoint that chair and vice chair for the committees. So with that, and based on the board direction, the action item before you is to appoint board president Elisa Martinez as chairperson, and board member Fong Nguyen as the vice chair of the committee moving forward. Can I have someone put forward that motion?
I have a question, actually.
Yes.
So I noticed, or in the public comment or public letters, there was some concern about that. What is there a reason that the board members are the chairperson and vice chairperson?
That is a question I will have to hand over to staff to answer.
Either one of us, for anybody on the board, can answer, because I think most, or Ms. De La Cruz. Would you like to answer that, or would you like me to answer that? So
President Martinez, yeah, if you wouldn't mind, this was the recommendation of the board when we were creating this committee, that the subcommittee would be the chair and the vice chair.
Yeah, so exactly. So you know, again, all that record is open for review. So when the board had the discussion around setting up the committee and setting up the objectives, it was the words I believe that we used as a board was, it was to be a board directed. And I think that was, you know, the intent doesn't mean that the board members make the decisions, but truly just kind of moving the meeting, keeping the structure in place. And so that was the actual direction that the board gave, was that it would be board directed, and that we would hold those seats from a meeting structure perspective. But not, you know, none of the board members hold more, you know, anybody's input or vote, so to speak, is more than anybody else on the committee. But that was the charge of the board. Back in Ms. De La Cruz, when was that? It's been some time since that.
Yeah, well, we started this process, I want to say, around January, February, and we finalized that document in April. Yeah, I think so.
Okay, I just wanted to clarify. I know it was a public question, so, and is this, just to clarify, is this an advisory committee?
Correct. And so what you will be providing to the board are recommendations. The recommendations are not binding. The board is taking that information and using that and using your recommendations as it makes its decisions. But your recommendations are not binding to the board. It is just an advisory committee for the Board of Education.
Okay, thank you.
There is a question from Ms. Angela Ringland.
I hear what you're saying about, the board chairing this and guiding it, but isn't that the role of Brianna Garcia, is guiding this along? Is there a problem with board members holding different roles and having other community members being the chair and vice chair?
So this is a committee that was assigned by the board. So again, myself and, for example, the other board member that are on here, we can't speak for the board because, right, in the sense that we can't change the direction that was already given. So that all we can do is move the committee with the charge that the entire board gave back in the spring. So I think that's kind of my only answer, is that I think that part of Brianna being here is that we follow a structure, that we are the intent, again, to Ms. Padilla's question, was this is an advisory committee, right? And so part of it is just making sure that we are bringing, we're hearing from everybody, right? As a subcommittee, we are wanting to make sure all stakeholders are heard. And that is basically our function. The role of Brianna is to guide the process, right? To make sure we are all kind of playing by the rules, if you will. That's my understanding. And Brianna, please correct me if I'm wrong.
Yeah, I concur. Ms. Ringland, the other thing to keep in mind really is the chair and the vice chair. You can look at it as more procedural roles. Just as when we started the meeting, was the one who called the roll call and then moving things forward on, okay, let's move to agenda A, B, C. That will be the role of the chair and the vice chair if the chair isn't available. And so it's procedural that way in nature. You are correct. I am here to make sure that this process is moving forward, that you are getting, as a committee, that you're getting the information that you need in order to make an informed decision. And so there's that just small distinction between myself as a facilitator and whoever's going to be acting as that chair and vice chair role in order for each meeting to move forward based on the agenda as it's set in advance.
Okay, I don't know, it just feels like a role that, other people could hold too, to move the agenda along and guide people as well, and make sure everybody's represented, but all right.
Ms. Garcia, those responses made sense to me. Actually, I think Sue was holding her hand before I was.
Thank you. Can I get a second?
Who made the motion?
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought that's what Ms. Padilla.
I was actually trying to make that motion to approve the proposed chairs.
So can I get a second?
I second the motion, Catherine.
Catherine, thank you very much. I appreciate that. So it might be easier, given that we are on split screens and everybody yelling aye probably isn't the most efficient way. Could we, Jody, could you just call out the committee members' names one by one so we can get a yay or a nay?
Yes, I can do that. I got a message. Is Sue Eustace? Does Sue have her hand up?
I just would like to say that I have sat over the 45 years that I've been in the district, I've sat on 2 other committees for school closure. And they had members of the committee that were not members of the board that were the chair and the vice chair. Yes, we had board members there. Yes, they listened and they participated somewhat, but it was more of a low key, and it was an advisory to the board. The board is going to be able to take and hear through the two members that are here everything that we're talking about. And to be quite honest with you, I'm uncomfortable with the members of the board being the chair and the vice chair. That's just my opinion.
Thank you, Ms. Eustace.
Thank you. Okay, so are we doing this together or are we doing individually?
I think it would be better to do individual just because I have a feeling it would be difficult to figure out who's saying yay or nay by a voice call or a raise of the hands.
Thank you. And so the motion was for President Martinez to be the chair. So I'm going to go through the roll call and just tell me if your vote is yes or no. So Shay Marshall?
I vote yes.
Yes. Thank you. Vilma is not here. Rachel Bloom?
No.
Thank you. Sue Eustace?
No.
Thank you. Janet is not here. Hamilton? Belone?
No.
Thank you. Veronica Medina?
No.
Thank you. Selena Nevarez? Is Selena here? I'll go on. Angela Ringline?
No.
Thank you. Maria Ibarra?
No.
Was that a?
That was
Catherine?
no.
No for Maria, thank you. Catherine Ingham Waters?
Yes.
I'm sorry, Catherine, did you say yes or no?
I said yes.
Yes, thank you. Christine Dix? Christy Dix?
No.
Thank you. Michelle Padilla?
Yes.
Thank you. Elisa Martinez?
Yes.
Thank you. Fong Nguyen? I'm sorry, I didn't hear Fong. Did you answer yes or no?
No.
Was that a no? Thank you. Okay, so for this, we had Vilma is not present, Janet is not present, Selena is not present. So we had 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4, 4, yes. 3 absent. Okay. Okay, so for this vote, we had 4 yeses. We had 8 noes. And we had 3 absent.
I have a question. Is Susie McCarty a panelist or?
McCarthy? No.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, she's in the meeting. She's listening as a community member.
Okay.
Thank you.
Sorry, Jody, it looks like on the comments that someone said Celine is present, but she is muted. And if you could unmute her.
All right. Paul, are you able to do that for us? In the comment, can she give us her vote? I cannot see the comments.
It just says Kathy is saying she's only on her phone.
Okay.
Oh, looks like they're trying to fix it.
Thank you. Yes, we want to give her vote. Okay, I need to stop screen share for just a moment for the voting. All right. And I'm sorry, that was Celine. Celine, can we hear you now?
Yeah, I don't see her name. No?
No. Is any, okay.
Yeah, I'm not sure. It's just in the little question and answer section on the bottom. Says she was only able to call in because she wasn't given a participant link, I guess.
Okay. Okay, well, I will see what I can do about getting her vote. So that may change the count. Should I go ahead and move forward with the vice chair count vote?
Well, let's finish the chair first. So
Okay.
even whichever, based on the count we have, which was 4 yeses, I believe 8 noes, and 3 no, 3 not here, except for potentially Celine, which will change. But even if she votes yes, that's still not enough to carry the motion. So the motion does not carry. So then I will ask, are there any nominations for chair?
Actually, Brianna, this was a question I have because this is a board directive. This was the board gave this direction via the document. So I think that this is going to have to go back to the board. And so the board will have to make the decision, you know, the official vote to not have a board member be the chair and vice chair, which is, I'm fine, but again, we can't make that decision, only the board can.
Understand.
And also, I thought that we were approving both at the same time, so not realizing that it was just for one.
Yeah. No,
The motion was made for just one though. So,
one. So we'll be doing the vice chair next.
yeah. So let's procedurally go through it, and then let's, you know, if this, we'll see where that lands, and then at least for the chair, that we'll have to go back to the board on that. So I make a motion to that member, board member Nguyen is the vice chair of the Consolidation Committee.
Can I get a second?
I second that, Catherine.
Catherine, thank you. All right, Jody, one more time.
Thank you. So yes, we have a motion that member Nguyen be the vice chair of the committee. So yes or no, Shay Marshall?
I vote yes.
Yes, thank you. Rachel Bloom?
Yes.
Thank you. Sue Eustace?
No.
Thank you. Hamilton Baylon? Oh,
No.
no, thank you. Veronica Medina?
No.
Thank you. Celine Nevarez? She able to come in yet? Angela Ringline?
No.
Thank you. Maria Ibarra?
Yes.
Thank you. Catherine Ingham Waters?
Yes.
Thank you. Christy Dix?
No.
Thank you. Michelle Padilla?
Yes.
Thank you. Elise Martinez? Elisa?
Yes.
Thank you. Fong Nguyen?
No.
Thank you. Okay, so let me count.
Jody, if I may add, Ms. Lean Navarez's vote, she just provided it to me and it's a no.
For both or just for the vice chair?
This was just sent right now, so I would say it's for the vice chair.
Thank you. Perfect, thank you. Okay. Okay, so for the motion of member Nguyen being the vice chair to the committee, we had a vote of 6 yes, 7 no, and 2 absent.
All right, so same here, the motion does not carry. So we will table that, and I will work with staff to talk with the board and agenda and have that item so they can determine how they would like to proceed with regards to the chair and vice chair. And so that said, then I will keep moving forward with the agenda. So the next item that we have is
Sorry, Brianna, sorry, before we get going on the next item, we're about 15 minutes out, so we will have to extend the meeting if we want to get through any additional agenda items. I don't think we'll get through everything in the next 15 minutes.
So we have one of two options. We can vote to extend the meeting. I would argue it would probably take us, let's be optimistic and say 8:30, an extra half an hour. And as we get closer to that, we can determine if we want to just move the item to the next meeting or extend any further. Do I have a motion from anyone to extend the meeting by half an hour until 8:30?
I move that we extend the meeting for a half an hour until 8:30.
Thank you. And just to clarify, Brianna, we could only extend once. So if we only do half hour, we can't extend anymore.
Can I amend my motion?
Yes, you may.
I move that we extend the meeting for up to 1 hour until 9 o'clock.
Thank you, Ms. Bloom. Do I have a second?
I second.
Thank you, Ms. Martinez. And I do appreciate all of your potential willingness to move this forward. I think the technical difficulties at the beginning set us behind. We will endeavor in the future to make sure we want to respect your time and that we don't find a need to continue to extend meetings in the future beyond the allotted time. I think I can see everybody on the screen, and for this one, can I get a hand wave for yes, voting yes? All right. Thank you. You put your hands down. Do we have any no's? All right, only one no. So the motion carries. Catherine, if you need to drop off, like, we completely understand.
Thank you.
I hope you're able to stay with us. So let's move. What I'd like to do is just give you a very brief overview of the school sites under consideration. If you can pull that back up, Jody. I want to note that this is just a quick overview. This was not meant to be extensive or all-inclusive. We just wanted you to give you an idea of what's happening at the school sites with regards to name, address, capacity, enrollment, etc. And as we move forward with the presentations in future meetings, then you will get much more detailed information on each one of these sites in order to be able to make a recommendation to the board. So this is strictly and simply just a brief overview of what's happening or what each school site looks like, so you can start to get those in your mind as you move forward. So if we can get the next slide, you will see on this slide, we just wanted you to also have an idea of where the data came from. As you can imagine, when we're trying to source data, there's some information that's going to be regularly changing, especially when you're talking about enrollment and that type of information. And so this slide is just providing you with source information so that you know where the data came from and when. So for example, the enrollment data is based on CalPADS information that was reported in December of 2019. The student capacity information was based on the district's facilities master plan. And you'll also note that the capacity for the loading standards that you might see are also based on loading standards that were provided by the Office of Public School Construction and the California Department of Education. They set loading standards, and so in reality, when you're looking at your school sites, and even the district might be loading the classes at higher or lower rates than this, but this is the standard that's typically used when they're looking at building facilities, modernizing facilities, and et cetera. And so that's the standard number there. Regarding the other section, that was just, again, a couple of the programs or services that are offered at each school site. It isn't meant to be comprehensive. As we go through the rest of the presentations over the next several weeks, you will get much more detailed information about each site at that point. Okay. So if we can go to the next slide, the first school site is Birch Grove Primary. This is located at 6071 Smith Avenue. It's a grade transitional kindergarten through second grade. The enrollment, again, as of 2019 in December, was 402 students. When you're looking at capacity, I want you to keep two things in mind, not only this evening, but as we move forward in the presentations over the next several weeks. You're going to see two capacity numbers in a lot of situations. You're going to see the first one that shows you 19 classrooms at 475. Those 19 classrooms are the ones that are in physically built and permanent facilities. So these are the actual school buildings versus that second number, which shows 19 classrooms and 6 portables, meaning the capacity is at 625. That's the capacity if you include those portable buildings. You need to know what that capacity is at each one of those campuses, but know that as we start talking about the potential of closing school sites or consolidating school sites, we want to look at the capacity within permanent facilities. Portable classrooms are by their nature meant to be temporary. For many schools across California, they have not turned out to be temporary. They have in many cases been there for years and years, but they are not, they were not designed or constructed to be permanent facilities. And so when you are in a committee such as this and there's the potential of closing or consolidating school sites, one of the first things that any district would look at is the removal of those portable buildings first, before you start determining that, oh, we need to close down sites. And so I just want to bring that to your attention that you're going to see these two numbers, but as we move forward, we really want to focus on the capacity of the school sites based on the permanent facilities that are on each campus. And then the other thing to note on this site is that it does have a child care center on the site as well. Yes, Mr. Balin, I see your hands.
Yes, so the classrooms, the physical classrooms, I'm assuming we're going to go over whether or not those are being used or if they're up to date. Is that like in a later meeting?
Yes, and so we're going to be looking at, you know, demographics at facilities, et cetera. And so when we look at the facilities, they'll be talking about how, you know, enrollment, how many are being used, what the available capacity is at each school site, et cetera, so that you can make those determinations. Again, this is just, we wanted to give you an idea of the sites that we're looking at and kind of big picture what's there.
So just to clarify, just because it says 19 classrooms doesn't mean that all those classrooms are being used, correct?
Correct. And if you can start to get an idea of that, if you see that the capacity is 19 classrooms at 475 students, but this campus only had an enrollment of 402. That means there's 73 seats available, and that translates into next X number of classroom where those 72 students would be seated. So you could start to see the difference between the capacity at a school site and how many students are actually on that school site. And you can see that there's available capacity at each one of these. Okay.
Thank you.
So the next school sites, next slide, please, Jody.
Sorry. Did Rachel, did you have a question?
Sorry, I've missed that. Go ahead, Rachel.
I might have missed it, but I'm wondering, I have two questions. One, what exactly is CalPads and how do they collect their data? And two, I think you addressed it, but my question would be, why would we want to include portables if we're closing schools and moving kids around? Like, we wouldn't want to move them into a portable. So you answered that, but I'm still wondering how they collected their data, because, you know, I'm a teacher and I'm at the sites, and I of course looked at these numbers and I'm going, that's not right. So I'm just wondering how they collected these data.
So this is attendance data that's submitted by the school districts to the state. And so CalPADS is a state-run system. And I always forget, it's the California, I'm going to get back to you on that. It is the enrollment database that the state uses in order to collect all of the data from all of the schools across California. And so this is data that's submitted by school districts at different points in time. And that is collected by the state, and that's what they use when they are reporting out enrollment and then eventually average daily attendance information.
And so the number of classrooms, that would be district provided information as well?
The number of classrooms, yes, that's based on the facilities master plan that was completed by the district.
The most recent one?
Correct.
With when Mr. Sanchez was our superintendent, right? Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? See, make sure I didn't miss any other hands. Okay. So the next school site is Birch Grove Intermediate, grades 3 through 6. Their enrollment for 2019-20, again, as of December of 2019, was 463. And here, Mr. Bailon, you could start to see that large difference. That campus has 29 classrooms and a capacity of 725 students. And it's only right now, or excuse me, as of December, was housing 463. And so that one does have a multitude potentially of available classrooms. And again, we'll get into that detail as we move forward. And if you were to count the portable buildings, which as I mentioned, Ms. Bloom, and you pointed out again, when we're talking about closing, we really want to focus on the permanent facilities and not the portables, but we wanted you to have all of the information and know what's physically on that school site right now. And so the school site has, along with the 29 permanent classrooms, 8 portable classrooms for a total of 925, capacity of 925 students on that campus. That also has a child care center and special education programs on that school site. So next slide. Graham Elementary, grades K through 6. As of December 2019, had 363 students. The capacity in the permanent buildings of 34 classrooms are 850 students. And with the additional 5 portable buildings, classrooms, it has capacity of up to 975. That campus has a Think Together After School program and also special education programs. The next slide is Kennedy Elementary School. It is housing TK through 6, 397 enrollment for 2019. In 24 classroom, it can house 600 students. And including the 5 portable classrooms, it can actually house 725 students. And that also has a child care facility on the campus. Next slide is Lincoln Elementary, TK through 6. Enrollment for 2019 was 379 students. Capacity in 21 classrooms is 525. If you add in the 3 portables, it can house up to 600 students. The next slide is Music Elementary, TK through 6 on that campus. 2019 enrollment was 269 students. It can house 600 in the 24 permanent classrooms and can house up to 850 if you count the 10 portables that are on the campus. They also have a child care center and a special education program. Is that your hand, Ms. Medina? Go ahead.
Yes, I was just curious if there would be a separate slide or there's no mention of the preschool.
Correct. When again, we were trying to provide the enrollments for the K through or the TK through 6. We do know that there are preschools on a couple of these campuses, and then when we provide the detailed information on the facilities, enrollment, etc., in our future meetings, we will include those preschool students as well.
And then just one other thing, because I guess it does impact how the rooms are loaded. In further meetings, you'll be giving us information about what specific types of special education classes are at which sites, correct?
Correct. Yes, because you're right. As we showed in that source slide, the special education is loaded at a much lower number than the TK through 6 or TK through or the other grade spans that are there. So yes, you will have all of that detailed information for each one of the school sites as we move forward.
Thank you.
So I think next slide. Schilling Elementary, it houses grades TK through 6. At 2019-20 enrollment was 368 students. It can house up to 650 students in its 26 permanent classroom facilities. And if you were to count the 11 portables, it would house up to 925 students. They also have an after-school program. There's a plan for a dual immersion program in 21-22, and it also has a special education program. Next slide is Snow Elementary, grades K through 6. Its enrollment in 2019-20 was 307. Capacity in the 22 classrooms it has is 550, and with the additional 3 portables, you have up to 625 students that could fit on that campus currently. It also has a child care center and a special education program. So on the next slide, we are showing you the junior high school. The conversation based on the board's charge, we're not looking at closing the junior high school, but there was the potential for a proposal to reconfigure the junior high school to include a middle school. And so that's why we wanted to provide you the information on this one as well, because it'll be part of the potential consideration since we were looking at not only closure, but potential reconfiguration or consolidation of various school sites. And so the junior high right now is housing grades 7 through 8 only, those 2 grades. It has 893 students in 2019-20, has the capacity to house 1,404 students in 52 classrooms. And with the addition of 4 portables, it can house up to 1,512. It also has after-school program and special ed program. And again, you'll see the note about the potential, the conversations that have been had in the past about bringing 6th graders onto the campus to create that larger population there. And then the last slide we have for you on the next one is McGregor Alternative. You'll notice that there is some strikeouts and some red text, and that was because the slide that was included in the hard copy presentation that you received had some incorrect information. The updated version was not included in your packet, and so we wanted you to be able to clearly see what the difference was in what you have in your packet and what we're showing you this evening. And so this campus currently has the capacity for 594 students, or 621 students if you include the portable buildings. It has a couple of different programs on the campus. It has the Bridgepoint High, which is a 9 through 12 and has 75 students, and the Crossroads Independent Study, and that's kindergarten through 12th grade and has approximately 37 students. And we did find that the adult school has an enrollment of 552. And you have to keep in mind when you're looking at these populations and this capacity, it would seem that it's over capacity based on this information, but obviously when you're looking at the adult school, they're not on campus at the same time as the K through 12 students. And so we just want to note that you don't want to look at that and start to add up that enrollment and say that they have more than they have available for right now because of that distinction. So do I have any questions on those? Again, we were just trying to give you a really broad overview of the school sites. Yes, Ms. Bloom.
Thank you. So I have just a question about usability. So I'm looking at, it just says like classrooms, and then it says how much space we have left. But at a school, we don't fill every single classroom with 25 or 26 or 30 kids. Like, we need extra rooms, like for the book room, for the makerspace, for, you know, it's nice if the PE teacher can have a PE classroom. There might be an APE teacher, or there might be counselors, mental health clinicians. We might have a room that we need, you know, for the speech pathologist. Or so I just feel like this data, like these data, it's just not complete. It doesn't give us a real picture of like how much actual space is left in the buildings. When can the members of the committee expect to get that updated information that might be more useful to us?
So again, this was just meant to give you a broad overview for everyone, because not everyone is working at a campus. And so we wanted the committee to have just a general idea of what school sites we were looking at, and big picture the enrollment and the potential capacity. When we get to the presentation on demographics and the presentation on facilities, we'll be looking at much more detailed information about how the space is being used, how many students, et cetera, for each one of those campuses.
Thank you, Ms. Garcia. I appreciate that. Thank you.
And Ms. Nguyen, you're unmuted. Did you have a comment or a question?
No, I'm sorry.
No worries. All right. Any other?
Angela, I thought, did Angela have her hand up?
Yeah, I actually did. I kind of want to mirror Ms. Bloom's sentiments, and I know she asked where the numbers were gotten from, but I feel like these numbers aren't quite right. I mean, even looking at Kennedy, it's saying like there's a capacity for 600, but I'm not getting those numbers. I'm questioning what's written there, because it looks to me like we have a capacity for 400.
Well, if you will think back, and we use the loading standards, as I mentioned before, they use the loading standards from the Office of Public School Construction. And so let me go, and you're simply taking that and multiplying it times the number of classrooms. And again, the way that they're actually loaded and the way that you might actually have students on campus, the way that the district is operationalizing that might be different. But we have to use some standard metric, and this is the metric that the state uses when it is allocating facilities, when it's determining how many facilities a district, how many classrooms a district needs to build for a certain number of students, etc. And so
I understand that. I mean, I have kids at Kennedy, so I know, and I had, messaged to teachers, and we have 23 classrooms there, and that's including our portables. So when I'm looking at saying 24 plus 5 portables, I mean, I understand that using like, a resource room here or a science classroom here, but I feel like these numbers are off, and not just on my school site.
So
maybe I will have to readdress the numbers. Like we have to have a clear picture of what we're working with, even to move forward.
And so what we will have with the facilities presentation, the facilities master plan that has diagrams that shows the classrooms. And so you'll be able to have that information, both looking at that in a picture form, as well as looking at it in table and data numbers. So again, this was just meant to be a broad brush so you would know what school sites were in question. And we will be looking at that much more detailed information as we move forward. Any other questions? Okay. So what we want to do next is really have a conversation and take a look at potential criteria that you can use against which to score these school sites as we move forward. I mentioned towards the beginning of the presentation that what we really want is an objective set of measures when we're looking at these school sites. And so that we know that we're comparing apples to apples across all of these when we are moving forward, so that we have some objective criteria to work from. And it's important that we have some agreements at the beginning to these criteria, so that I'm trying to make sure that we are reducing the subjectivity as we move forward. And so what is on the next slide, and in more detailed in one of the handouts that was attached to the agenda, is proposed criteria and scoring methodology. So this was built from a couple of things. The California Department of Education on its website has a list of considerations when you're considering school closure, and different items that it believes should be taken into consideration by a committee such as yourself when they are looking at potential school closures moving forward. So I took that list of information, in order to build what the presentations are going to be over the next several weeks, and to develop a criteria for you guys to consider as objective measures moving forward. The way that this criteria is broken up is by subject area that is reflective of the meetings that are going to be planned over the next several weeks, with the intent that, for example, at the first meeting, we'll be presenting to you demographic and capacity information that was completed by the demographer for the district. And once we're providing all that information, we have the opportunity to ask questions, to get additional information if needed, and then we can effectively score each school site against that criteria. The next meeting would be on facilities, and we have the ability to do that there as well, so that by the time we get through the 4 content-specific meetings, you hopefully have the data that you need in order to score this, and then we can have a better idea if there's any additional information that the committee needs to take into consideration as it makes its ultimate recommendation to the board. Does that make sense? All right. So I'd like to just take a look at these criteria with you and walk through them and see if there are any questions from anybody on the committee on any one of those. Yes, Mr. Bailon.
Yeah, I just was wondering if somebody could explain in more detail the number 10, performance level of orange or red in 2 or more state priorities.
So what I'd love to do, if it's okay with you, is just go section by section. That way we can make sure we have, there are any questions, just to keep it a little bit orderly, if that's okay.
No, not a problem. I thought we were all just going to look it over and ask questions, but that's a better idea.
Thank you. So, and maybe we'll get through it and nobody will have anything until we get to 10. So the first category that we're looking at is demographics and capacity. And so there are 4 potential or proposed criteria that we'd be looking at there. And this really is looking at the current school enrollment and trying to determine whether or not that enrollment is low, and based on the demographic information that we're going to be looking at, has the potential to remain low. Because again, I think that's the biggest thing when we're looking at this, and why one of the main reasons why you're considering school closure is that you have much more capacity across the district than you actually do the number of students because of declining enrollment over the years. And so these 4 are trying to capture that. The first one is looking at enrollment and determining whether it's low, and the definition of low for this particular instance is if enrollment is lower than basically 70% capacity. The higher the score, the idea is at the end of this, where if you were to add all of those yeses up, the higher the score, the higher it would be on the recommendation for potential closure or consolidation. And then we also have a weighted methodology in case we get ties, that we have an additional scoring criteria to help with that. So that first item is just looking at enrollment as one metric. The second one is demographic diversity of the school population. Again, we're trying to look at a holistic approach of any particular school site. And it's not simply the number of kids, but as a district, ensuring or wanting to make sure that you have demographically diverse, not only population in total, but school sites as well. The third criteria would be excess classroom capacity. And this is once we look at that demographic and capacity information, you'll have a little more of an idea of what that looks like. And it's this idea of, yes, you have a school campus that can house 600 students, but there's only 300 students. And so it has the capacity, excess capacity of those students or a potential room at that school site. And again, none of these are taken in a vacuum. It's not just one, and that's what's going to make a determination. We're looking at all of these in totality as we move through these and try to make those decisions. The last one in this section is proximity to schools with capacity to accommodate incoming students. So the thought with this one is if you have a school sites that you would potentially recommend for closure, then you want to have a thought of, is there a place for these students to go? And while we know that all of your school sites are relatively close to each other, this idea that if you were closing a school in one neighborhood, you don't want to send a student 10 or 15 miles away if there are neighboring schools that have the capacity in order to house those students when they have to be redistributed based on the closure of a school site. So those are the three items that would be, or excuse me, the four items we would be looking at under demographics and capacity. Does anybody have any question on any of those four? Okay, so we're going to move on to the facilities section. Here, we have five five criteria that we're going to be looking at. The first are facilities are in good condition. The state has a facilities inspection tool that districts go through, and they actually will go and check off the condition of the facilities, and they're rated on a good, fair, and poor scale. So that would be, we'd be looking at what that facilities inspection tool states and assigning the appropriate score that goes with that one. And that's really looking at, again, the condition of the school and taking into consideration, they're looking at, sewers and air conditioning, the condition of the play surfaces. It has a whole list of items that we'll be looking at when we show you that information. The second criteria is modernization and construction or other projects that have been recently completed. That goes in line with one of the public comments that we heard at the beginning. We want to take into consideration any improvements that have been made to the facilities. If you have a facility, for example, where the district spent $5 million to put in new fiber optic lines, that wouldn't necessarily be the first one on the top of the list in order to potentially close, given the investment that was just made in that facility. And so that's something that we do want to take into consideration. The third criteria is if there are any unique facilities, and by unique, we are looking at facilities that couldn't be readily replicated and aren't found at any school sites. While I know this is not something that you have at your school districts, I think a good example of this is you go across school districts that have built, on one of their high school campuses, they have an Olympic-sized swimming pool. And there's only one campus in the entire district that has that type of facility, and that's unique and can't easily be replicated someplace else. And so we want to find out or look at whether or not any of your school sites have any type of facilities of that nature that you want to take into consideration before you would close that school site, because it can't be replicated easily elsewhere. The fourth criteria is support spaces. We want to look at the cafeteria, multi-purpose room, playgrounds, science labs, those types of things, and see if they have sufficient capacity to meet current and future projected enrollment. I can't tell you how many school sites I have been on that are housing 500 students, but the cafeteria can only seat 350 kids. And it requires students eating lunch from 10 in the morning till 2 o'clock in the afternoon. And so we want to look at not only how many classrooms a campus has and whether there's enough seats for students, we want to make sure that all of those support facilities are also sufficient to house the population or potential population of that school site. And then lastly, we want to look at any environmental factors that might affect the current or future use of the property. A lot of school sites across California and in your districts, they weren't built 5 or 10 years ago. They were built, 50 to 100 years ago. And conditions have changed. Earthquake faults have been found. They have built high-speed rails and different things. And so we want to look at, are there any factors outside of the campus or that are not specific to the buildings or the campus itself that might affect the desirability of building on that site? If for some reason there were a fire or something that happened on that campus, would you build it again? Or because we know that there's a high-speed rail, that's not where you would want to put those students or rebuild that school site. So we want to take a look at those types of potential impacts as well. Do I have any questions on the facilities? Okay, I don't see any. So it looks like, Mr. Bayon, we got exactly where you wanted to get to. We want to look at the educational and student support services. So for that first one, performance level of orange or red and 2 or more of the state priorities. So over the last several years, the state of California has implemented a new rating systems for schools. Instead of looking in the past, they looked at just the API, which was academic performance indicator. That was one number that all schools were judged by, and it was heavily correlated with test scores. What they have done is move to a multiple measure system where they're looking at not only test scores, but suspension rates and chronic absenteeism, how various subgroups are doing within your school community. And they developed the California Schools Dashboard. And that dashboard looks at various state indicators, and they look at 2 things: the status, so where a school rates and a district rates in a given year, and what the change has been from last year to this year. Because not only do they want to give schools and districts credit for how they're doing, but they also want to give credit to those schools and districts that are making progress for their students. And so those 2 items, the status and score, change, are put together, and it develops a color performance level. It goes from blue as the highest, then green, then yellow, then orange, then red. So red is the lowest. And the state uses a metric of, if you have a student group or a school site that has 2 or more of those performance, those state priorities in the red or orange indicator, they look at that as a school site that needs some technical assistance to try to help to get students' performance to increase. And so the idea is to try to look at, we're again trying to find an objective measure of academic performance that's not strictly a test score metric. And so this seems, because it is something that is used by the state and that we actually have for this district, for all of the school sites and for schools across California, this seems like the most objective measure to use for the academic performance, as well as just the holistic school climate on a school campus. Does that answer your question?
Yes, it does. And I'm assuming that that information is already available on a website?
Yes, we will provide that information. But B, you can actually go to the California School Dashboard website right now, and you could look up that information for the district and for each one of the schools, and it breaks it also down by subgroups. So it looks at groups by racial and ethnic makeup. It looks at English learners. It looks at special education students. It breaks down all of that information there for you. So you can look at that now, but we will also present that information to you.
Okay, thank you.
The second item under the education and student support services category is district-wide programs that would need to be relocated. So again, this is a little bit like those unique facilities. Are there any programs that are happening at the school site but that are serving the district at large. And if you were to close that school site, then you would need to move that program to another site. That doesn't mean that it can't be relocated, but we want to take that into consideration when you're considering whether or not to close a school site. And then the next part of that, it's a B, is if you do have to relocate that program, is there some place to relocate it to? Some programs require special equipment or special facilities. Others really can just move into another 3 classrooms someplace else. And so we want to make that determination of not only are there programs that would need to be relocated, but is there someplace that you could actually relocate those programs to? Is it a program that can be relocated? And so those are the 3 that we want to look at under the educational and student support services category. Do I have any questions on that? Nope, I don't see any. All right. The last category that we want to look at is business services and other community impacts and considerations. And so one of the main things here is the safety of students. Kids right now, in a lot of cases, are walking to school if they're in their neighborhood community school or their parents are taking them to school. And you want to make sure that if you have to close a school site, that there are no safety concerns with the student being able to get from their current school to wherever their newly reassigned school is. You don't have them in Newark, but you don't want them having to cross a freeway. You don't, if they're gonna have to cross a 4-lane busy intersection, are there crossing guards at those intersections so that the students are safe? So they call it basically safe routes to school. And so we want to ensure that if you have to close a school site and the students would be going to neighboring schools, are there safe paths for those students in one community to get to those other schools? And so we want to be able to look at that. And lastly, we want to look at the fiscal impacts. If there are any net savings from closing the schools. When you close school sites, a lot of people automatically think, oh, well, you just saved all of this money because you don't have those teachers or those staff, or you're not operating that facility anymore. And there are savings to closing school sites, but some of those expenses are just going to move with the kids. If you are closing a school site, that doesn't mean all of the teachers are fired and laid off. You're still going to need those teachers to move with those students. And so there might be costs associated with relocating, with physically moving from the potential furniture and equipment to books and supplies, etc. And so you want to look at the net savings, if there are any, to the closure of that school site. Because as again was mentioned during the public comment, one of the reasons that you're looking at this is also fiscal considerations and the district's current budget. And so business services will be presenting on the operational costs of the districts, the budget as a whole, and any potential savings from the closures of any school sites. And so we'll be looking at those 2 criteria in that section. Do I have any questions about either of those? Okay, I don't see any hands. And so this is the criteria based on those objectives. And I'd like to ask, is there anything else that wasn't considered here that you think we should consider or potentially build a criteria around as we move forward? And I will say that, again, we want to try to build an objective place to start right now. But at the end of this process, once we have all of the numbers in place, we will have a much a holistic conversation about what the ranking provides to us. And if there are any other considerations or things that have to be thought about when we're making that final, when you're making that final recommendation to the board. And so I don't want you to think that this is all we're going to, this is exclusively, once that number pops out, that's it. We do want that to guide us because we want to keep an objective measure, but we will be able at the end to just have a kind of holistic conversation, what we know, once we know what the scores are based on this metric, these metrics. So any questions or additions or serious objections? Yes, Mr. Balon.
I just had a question. If we find out or determine that there's another criteria that is not currently on this list, would that be taken into consideration, or do we have to, like at this point, submit an idea for criteria?
No, as we're moving forward, if somebody else has another idea and something else they'd like to consider, then as a committee, the committee would consider that option, and you would vote and determine whether or not you would like to add that to the criteria. I will be there along the way to make sure that we want to caution and make sure that any new criteria, again, remains objective, because you don't want a situation where you don't have any of this and you come to the end and everybody votes for the school that's not theirs or where their kids aren't. And because it's a very emotional decision, but no, if there are any other criteria as you go along and as you gather more data that you feel is important, that's a conversation that the committee can have, and that the committee will vote to add if they feel that that's important.
Thank you.
Any other questions or comments? Yes, Ms. Ibarra.
So are we, I don't want to say obligated, but do we have to consider each one of these? I have a little bit of a problem with number 10, or the first one under educational student support services, only because let's say that in our world was perfect and it came down to looking at how a school is performing. Sometimes a school could be performing maybe in the orange or the red because of, could be English learners, could be underserved students. And it almost seems like a punishment if we end up looking, I know we won't be looking only at that, but if that ends up being something that weighs in on the decision heavily, it seems like a punishment. I don't know if I'm explaining myself very well.
I will say two things to that question. One, as you mentioned, I think this is just one of a number of criteria. And I completely understand that there are many reasons why a school or students within that school may not be performing well, and it might not be an easy answer, and they're certainly never simple. But I felt that it was important to look at academic performance as one of the markers, because it could be that there's something about that school that is failing those students, and that's something that should be taken into consideration. Again, that my second part of your answer is that I hope that once we finish that scoring, if there's a school that rises to the top and everybody feels that the overwhelming reason was the performance, that is when we have that ability to have that conversation. That's just to talk about the potential mitigating circumstances that might be lending itself to it being a red or orange. And that can be part of the consideration that the committee takes. That said, again, these are in some respects your criteria, and we want to make sure that there's buy-in on all of them. And so if there is a overwhelming majority, or if there's a majority that doesn't believe that that is an appropriate criteria to look at all, that is a conversation that we should definitely have, because we want to make sure that when you get through this, if there's not any questions or anyone who doesn't buy into the results because they were not comfortable with all of the criteria, again, as a committee, that we're going to be looking at. Does that help?
Definitely.
Chrissy, is that you raising your hands?
Yes. I have the same feelings on number 10. I feel like that's maybe something we need to discuss. I don't know if now is the right time. Are we going to vote on this? Is that the next step?
Yes, the idea is to vote to adopt the criteria. Again, that doesn't mean that things can't change, but we do want to have a starting point.
Okay, so that would be my concern. Also on numbers 1 through 4, I guess there's such an issue with a lot of different schools feeling like the numbers that were presented probably weren't quite accurate. So I guess I would make an amendment to this criteria saying once we have accurate numbers, then those seem like a good starting point for that discussion. But with the current numbers, I would vote no on this 1 through 4.
No,
That makes sense.
and again, yes, totally understand. And again, at each one of those meetings, they will have much more detailed information. And if there's any question at that time, staff can hopefully address those questions or concerns, but they will have detailed numbers based on studies, et cetera, that have been done.
Okay, thanks.
So we have 2 that are concerned with number 10. Let's do this. In order to have a discussion about it, and oh, sorry, Catherine, I missed your hand before. Please go ahead.
Yeah, Rachel and I both have our hand raised in the Zoom column, the participants column. So Rachel, do you want to go first?
My apologies. Sorry about that.
No, that's okay.
Go ahead, Catherine. Go ahead.
Okay, mine was also regarding number 10. I have big issues with having that as part of the criteria.
Okay.
My question was actually about one of the documents we got was called SCAC 2020-827 proposed criteria. But with that, it also came out with like they called it the scoring methodology.
Yes.
And so like, will that become a conversation for later? Because we have these topics or these whatevers, but the scoring is really what will decide, like, is this characteristic of this school make them more likely to be a better candidate for closure or not? So like kind of, that seems like an important thing to decide. Like what everyone, like the grades, the scoring.
Thank you. Yes, so with the exception of number 5 and number 12, the initial scoring methodology is a simple yes, no. And so and it varies whether it's 1 point or 2 points, because the idea at the end of this is the higher it scores, the higher it would be on the recommendation for closure. So for example, excess capacity, number 3 under facilities. If it has excess capacity, it would get a 2. Meaning, and if it doesn't have any excess capacity, it would get a 1, meaning that it would be higher, would rank higher on the list once you start to add up all of the various items. The opposite of that, for example, is number 8 under facilities for support services or support spaces that have sufficient capacity to meet current and projected enrollment. In that case, if it has sufficient capacity, it only gets a 1. But if it doesn't, it would get a 2, because if it doesn't have sufficient capacity, again, you want it higher on the list in order to be a school that is potential for closing. And so that item or that scoring methodology there, that middle column, is a strict yes or no. Again, just trying to make this as objective as possible. We added I added the weighted methodology column because I figured, given we're looking at 7 school sites and potentially consolidations, there might be a good chance that some of them rank the same number. You add them all up and they all got a 10, or 3 of them got a 10. And we need to have some way of trying to differentiate and make a little bit more of a distinction about that recommendation besides just having a conversation. And so that weighted methodology just starts to score the school sites. So again, for example, on that excess capacity, it's a yes or a no that it has excess. And then from there, we start to score them. So the highest score, a number 8, because there's potentially 8 sites, would go to the school with the most excess capacity. So we literally sit down and go, okay, this school has 300 available seats, this one has 200, this one has 100, and so we score them 8, 7, 6, 5, 4. So again, at the end of all of this, you have the yes or no, the simple scoring, And if we have tiebreakers that have to happen, we have this more weighted or differentiated scoring pattern to help make that distinction. Does that make sense?
Yeah, thank you. It seems like if a school enrollment is low, wouldn't that then mean they might have excess capacity? It seems like they cancel out, but that's just what I'm thinking. But thank you very much for explaining that. I appreciate it. Thank you, Ms. Garcia.
No problem. And yeah, those two are a little bit, it depends on what side of the fence you're looking at, whether it's a good thing or a bad thing. So Superintendent Triplett, I think you had your hand up earlier. Was that right? Or your mic off?
No, you're right. Thank you, Brianna. Hi, everybody. Mark Triplett, Superintendent. I just want to appreciate you all for engaging in this really challenging but important work. I did just want to emphasize something about number 10, because I know that's stirring up some questions and concerns. I just think it's worthwhile understanding that the term performance level, when we're talking about the California dashboard, is a combination of what we would normally think of academic performance, but then also growth of the school, like academic growth. So it's not just how many kids are performing at a really high level, but it's they have an equation to determine how many kids are growing academically at that school, in addition to how many kids are performing at a high level. So just wanted to make sure everyone understood that, because it's easy to misunderstand the language there in number 10 and think it's just about one thing and not a combination of things.
Thank you, Superintendent. The other thing I do want to mention or make sure that I make clear is when you look at that California school dashboard, when we provide you with that information, it's not just academic information. So 2 of the metrics that it looks at are the math and ELA tests, but it looks at suspension rates, it looks at chronic absenteeism, it looks at your English language proficiency. So it's looking at the whole school and hopefully the whole child, and not simply their academic performance. So any other questions? All right, so I do want to ask, since there were at least 2 of you that had concerns with number 10, given that additional information, do you still have concerns? Do you want to have a further discussion about whether number 10 remains or not? And I'll ask that of Chrissy and Maria, since they were the 2 that spoke up.
Catherine as well.
Oh.
At least for myself personally, even with all the comments, I understand that not everything on there is academic. But again, even suspension rates, a lot of the times, it could also be English learners and underserved students that maybe have problems at home. I know it's not necessarily just them, but again, it almost seems like a punishment. It's a great thing to look at the dashboard, maybe for like a school site council where they're deciding on how to make the schools better, not necessarily on closing a school, my opinion.
Thank you. Catherine, you have your mute off.
Yes, I also agree that number 10 should be talked about more.
All right, so we are going to, we're going to do this. We will have, if someone will make a motion and a second, and then we can have some further conversation and take a vote on that.
I'll make a motion to take a look at number 10 to see if it's a criteria that should stay on here for the decision of closing potentially a school.
Thank you, Maria. Do I have a second?
I second.
Was that Chris? Oh, that was
Fong.
Oh, got it. Thank you. All right, we have a first and a second. Does anybody else have any other comment they'd like to add? No? All right, so Jody, I'm going to impose on you again. Oh, Rachel, I see your hands.
So at the risk of being like the newest worst hated member of the committee, you know, maybe it's not the worst idea to consider this. And also it is one of 14 things. So I just wanted to throw that out there that maybe it's not, you know, it's one of 14, and it might be just something to look at. But again, it's only one of 14.
Thank you. Yes, Mr. Balon. I keep going back with first names and last names.
That's okay. Either one's fine with me. If item 10 is removed, do we still get to review the criteria? It's just not used as a voting standard or a voting metric?
Oh, no, definitely. They still will present that information, yes.
Okay.
Hamilton, you had your hand raised.
Yeah, I'm torn. I'm a little bit back and forth on it. You know, being at the McGregor site and just looking at, you know, our scales, we don't even measure a lot, and we're obviously at the bottom. But I'm still, you know, there's a part of me that's still interested in what it brings up. So as much as I can see how, you know, there's different parts of the Newark neighborhood that are more affluent and some that are, you know, less. And initially that's where number 10 points to, right? It's kind of the socioeconomic, you know, situation or status for me that would seem to dictate the higher scores or the lower scores. At the same time, I still am very interested in what kind of conversations it will bring about in trying to make this decision. So I'm really torn whether or not to include it. I think I'm a little bit leaning more towards interest in finding out how it helps us decide and whether or not it does.
Thank you. Did I see any other hands? Veronica.
Member Nguyen has her hand up.
I had a question with respect to the dashboard. Would there be one for last year, even though the students weren't taking tests? Would we be looking at 2019's information for that?
So the dashboard was the 2019 dashboard that would actually be looking at 2018-19 information.
Okay, thank you.
Veronica, you had your hand raised.
I just spoke.
Sorry, my screen is a little bit glitchy. Board member Nguyen, that was you. Sorry.
So my question is, instead of, you know, if we can somehow rephrase the question and maybe not vote on, you know, the color metrics, but in terms of like fully evaluating either there's in terms of growth, so that schools in the district have the ability to leverage that more so, or if we don't, you know, put even a metric on it, don't even measure that one, but allow for us to be able to evaluate the data without having to rate it. Is that a possibility?
I would caution against just looking at growth. And I say that only because when they developed these performance levels, there was a very lengthy conversation at the states and looking at research and looking at information across various states. And they felt that it was important that it wasn't simply about growth, but also where a school site is now. And the idea with that is, as you said, you might have school sites that are doing gangbusters on every single metric. And you want to give them credit for that, for being able to maintain that for their students. But on the other side, they didn't want to ignore the fact that there are school sites that might not be, if you just look at the number that has to do with status, that might look like they're not doing well for their students, but you see that there is growth, that they are making progress, and then that's an important piece of it. And so they built these performance levels to look at both of those in tandem, so that you weren't looking at things in a vacuum, so that you were aware of where a school or a district was, but also showing improvement. And so I would argue that you shouldn't split those two apart, that it really should be a conversation of whether or not that's something, as you've been talking about, that you want to even consider when you're looking at a school site. And whether, again, as we've mentioned, it's one of 14 of these. I don't think it will have an outsized influence necessarily in the scheme of things. And again, I think if we get to the point where we have, one school site that's definitely would land on the recommendation list and it's by 1 point and it was because of this, then I think that's a conversation we could have at that time, instead of potentially just knocking it out altogether. Because I do think it's a valuable piece of information, because as you said, there are various reasons why a school site might not be doing so well. Some of them, and many of them, are complex and are not necessarily, I wouldn't, at the fault, for lack of a better word, of the student. And we don't want to fault the student when we're looking at these, but we do need to be aware that some schools might be doing better for their students than others.
Okay, great. Thank you so much.
Angela has her hand up.
Thank you. I'm actually also uncomfortable with number 10, and I'm not to be overly optimistic about our district, but do we know for sure that we have schools that are in orange or red in 2 or more priorities? Is that information we have available right now, or that would have to be looked at later?
You do have, Rachel was pointing, you do have a couple, yes.
Okay, so that's fine.
It might surprise you, I already did the research.
Awesome, thank you, Rachel. So then I get the feeling that there are people that are uncomfortable, and I know you're saying not to eliminate this criteria, but as we've also discussed, we can add things later. I would venture to say maybe we could make a motion just to eliminate that and see if it passes or fails right now.
No, and we have a motion to eliminate it, and we have a second. So this was just the conversation. I want to make sure that everybody is able to voice their opinion and concerns, and then we will take a vote.
I just wanted to weigh. I wanted to weigh in as well. I think I've definitely kind of gone back and forth on this one, but I think it really is an important conversation to have. And I think as a committee, we always have. Brianna, if we get to the case where to your point where this is really the differentiating factor, we as a committee can come back and say, hey, no, this is not the dimension we would want to use. That I think that's still always an open conversation. I think I'd be worried if we didn't have the conversation, because the orange and red, just because some of the, some perceptions around what may be causing us, to, underserved populations or whatnot, we may not be orange or red, because remember, it does take progress into consideration. So, I think I think it's a healthy conversation for us to have as to what is working well, because those are things that we want to make sure, let's just, whatever site it is where it may be red or orange, but we've got huge progression. How do we make sure, if that ends up being a site, that we don't lose those components that has been delivering the needs of the kids? So that's kind of my point of view for keeping it.
Thank you. Anyone else? All right. So as I mentioned, we have a motion and a second, so we will take a vote. Jody, would you mind pulling up the list and calling out everybody's name?
Very good. Okay, so the motion is to eliminate number 10 from the criteria, which is the performance level. Let me just make sure I can read this. To eliminate number 10, performance level of orange or red in 2 or more state priorities. So that's the motion. So, Shay Marshall, yes or no?
Yes.
Thank you. Rachel Bloom, yes or no?
No.
Thank you. Sue Eustace, yes or no?
Yes.
Thank you. Hamilton Baylone, yes or no?
No.
Thank you. Veronica Medina, yes or no?
No.
Celine Nevarez, yes or no? And I think somebody has to help me with Celine. Is she?
Yes, can you get back to that one? I'll ask.
Thank you. All right, so Angela Ringline, yes or no?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. Marie Ibarra, yes or no?
Yes.
Thank you. Catherine Ingham Waters, yes or no?
So yes means to take it out?
Yes, eliminate it.
Okay, yes.
Thank you. Christy Dix, yes or no?
No.
Thank you. Michelle Padilla, yes or no?
Yes.
Thank you. Elisa Martinez, yes or no?
Elisa, you're mute.
Sorry, no.
No. Thank you. Fong Win, yes or no?
No.
I'm sorry?
No.
No. Thank you. All right, give me just a moment. And did we get
No response, Jody.
no response? Thank you.
Jody, give me 1 second. I'm getting a response.
Thank you.
And it's a no.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so the motion to eliminate number 10, 5 yeses, 7 noes, and 2 absent. Wait a minute, that does a miscount. Hang on, I'm sorry.
I think I have 7 and 6.
Okay, let's see, yes, 1, 2, 6 yeses. Okay, thank you, and 1, 2. So I stand corrected. The vote to have number 10 eliminated, 6 yes, 7 no, 2 absent.
So the motion does not pass. So we will keep number 10 on. And again, it's not that we can't have a conversation. If this is the deciding factor, we can certainly have that conversation if and when it comes to that point. All right. So with that motion, can I get a motion and a second? We have about 6 minutes left. A second and a motion to approve the proposed criteria.
I move that we approve the criteria.
Thank you, Fong. Can I get a
I second.
Thank you, Rachel. All right, one more time, Jody.
Thank you. Yes, so the motion is to approve the criteria as presented. Shay, yes or no?
Yes.
Thank you. Rachel Bloom, yes or no?
Yes.
Thank you. Sue Eustace, yes or no?
Yes.
Thank you. Hamilton Baylone?
Yes.
Thank you. Veronica Medina?
Yes.
Thank you. Celine Nevarez? I'll let Lucia get that for me. Angela Ringline?
Yes.
Thank you. Maria Ibarra?
Sorry, guys, I'm just a tad stubborn. No.
No problem. No need to apologize.
Catherine Ingham Waters.
Yes.
Thank you. Christy Dix.
I'll say yes, as long as we get those correct numbers on 1 through 4. I'm just going to put one last nudge in that.
Got it.
Thank you.
Nicely.
Thank you. Michelle Padilla.
Yes.
Thank you. Elisa Martinez.
Yes.
Thank you. Fong Win.
Yes.
Thank you. Let me just add that up.
And Jody, I got a yes for Selena Navarez.
Thank you.
And Maria, never apologize for
Yeah.
your voting. You're
That's what-
voting with your heart, it's fine, and your head, so it's all good.
And it's important that everybody hears everybody's viewpoints. Otherwise, if everybody thought the same way, we wouldn't need this. So,
Yep. So the count for adopting the criteria is presented. 12 yes, 1 no, 2 absent.
all right. Thank you very much for doing that work, everyone. I truly appreciate it. And so one last thing, and then we can let you go. Jody, if you have a second there to just pull up the next slide. So this shows you the meeting dates that we have scheduled. And I believe Jody sent all of these out to you, or no, it was just here for conversation to make sure. And these are the proposed topics that we're looking at and the information that's going to be provided. And so the next meeting would be September 10th. And that is going to be providing you with demographic and capacity information. The third meeting on September 15th, that's only a week difference in between those two, is on the facilities. The meeting after that, September 24th, is going to be on the educational and student support services information. Fifth meeting is October 8th. That'll cover the business services and other community impacts and considerations. Then we will, through all of that, if there's any information that wasn't provided that you need additional information on, etc., those will be voiced at each meeting, and so staff can gather that information as well to bring to the next one. But at that last October 8th meeting, we want to do kind of an overview and go, okay, is there anything we haven't covered that you feel is important that we can get for you? So that when we get together on October 22nd, we can actually then do, while we would have been scoring each one of these sections at each individual meeting, we can look at that, you know, that holistic picture, look at where the scoring ends us up. And if we have to have any of those conversations, like with number 10 or whatever that might be, we can have those then. Have conversations about other recommendations and information that you want to include in the report, etc. With the idea being that as we're going through all of this, I'll be writing up a draft report. I will provide that to you so that on October 29th, we can review that report. We can make any edits, any changes, any additions that all of you have, so that we can have a report that is approved by the committee, so we can finalize it and it can go to the board. The idea is that the board will be hearing the item at one board meeting in November. I believe it's November 5th, and then voting on it at their subsequent meeting in November. All right. So do I, before I heard a voice.
That's okay. Rachel Bloom has her hand up.
Yes, Rachel.
Just a plea, I guess, as a member of the committee. I feel like I have a lot of weight on my shoulders, but I feel like if I have accurate and complete information, I can make my recommendation. So just a plea that all the information we get is accurate and complete, and getting information about how the data was collected and where it comes from, that would really help me make my decision. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? All right, with that, it is exactly 9 o'clock. I thank you, all of you, for being here, for spending the time, the extra time, for dealing with that technical glitch at the very beginning of all of this. We really do appreciate it. This is important work that you're doing. And it's important for your community, as Rachel said, that you're informed and are able to make a decision with all of the information available to you that we can make available to you. So with that, we will adjourn the meeting at 9 p.m. and I will see all of you again on September 10th. Thank you. Have a good evening and stay safe and healthy out there.
Thank
Thank
you.
you,
Have a good
committee.
night.
Appreciate you.
Thank you.
Brianna, real quick, could I just ask you one more time? I know you explained it,
Yeah.
but what was the reason that the preschool they were not in the data?
We just pulled together, we were trying again just to get some overall information, and normally the preschool, they have them counted separately and it wasn't added in. And so that was our oversight and mistake. But when we provide all of the capacity and demographic and facilities, that will be laid out so that you know how many preschool kids are there. And they also use different facilities, etc. How many preschool versus K through 12.
Okay. Yeah, just because I'm going to see them at a PTA meeting soon, and I know they're going to ask me why that wasn't counted. So I want to have a better answer, than I'm not sure.
You smacked us around. We got it.
Okay, thank you.